For these, it asks us to find the C value that makes a perfect square trinomial. So remember, this is our process of completing the square. And when we're completing the square, we just take b divided by 2 and square it. So I take the b value right here, which is the positive 10. I divide it by 2 and I square it. So that's 5 squared, which is 25. So in this first one, the C value should be a 25. The next one, again, I take the B value, which is the negative 16. I divide it by 2 and I square it. So that's a negative 8 squared, which is a positive 64. So in this scenario, the C value is a 64. Okay, these are the values that will make a perfect square trinomial. Then the last one, 8 divided by 2, and I square it. So that's 4 squared, which is 16. Okay, so the C value this time equals a 16, and that's it. All right, that's our process of completing the square. So in the next couple, it says to use the discriminant to state the number of real solutions. Remember, with our discriminant, if the discriminant is 0, there's 1 real solution. If the discriminant is positive, it's 2 real solutions. And if the discriminant is negative, it's no real solutions. All right, so remember, the discriminant is our b squared minus 4ac. Comes right from our quadratic formula. So for this first one, I take b, which is the 4. So I do 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is a 1. And I plug it in. That's 16 minus 16, which is 0. Since my discriminant is 0, this is going to have 1 real solution. Okay? And I capitalized the S, but not the R. And that's going to bother me. So 1 real solution. There we go. So the next one, again, I use my discriminant. So I do a negative 1 squared minus 4 times a, which is a negative 2, times c, which is a positive 5. And I plug it in. That's a 1. This is going to be a plus 40, which gives me a 41. This time, since my discriminant is 41, that's a positive, means I'm going to have 2 real solutions. For the last one, again, I do b squared minus 4ac, so I do the 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 10. So that's a 16 minus 40, and 16 minus 40 is a negative 24. So for this one, since the discriminant is negative, it's no real solutions. And now we're going to carry over what we just talked about here into this next example, maybe take it up a notch or two. But for this one, it says for the equation 2x squared plus 4x plus c equals 0, we want to find the values of c such that the equation has 2 real solutions, 1 real solution, and no real solutions. Okay, so we're going to use our discriminant, and some of these are going to be expressed in terms of a range, in terms of an inequality. All right, so keep in mind, to get 1 real solution, if we're talking about 1 real solution for something, it means that the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, would have to equal 0. All right. For 2 real solutions, well, that means that our discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, has to be positive. In other words, it has to be greater than 0. Okay. And then the last one, for no real solutions, that means that our discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, would have to be negative or less than 0. And now this asked me to solve for c. It asked me to find c for each of these scenarios. Well, look at the equation that we have. We're given the b values and the a values. Here the a is 2 and the b is 4. So all I'm going to do is plug a and b in. So I've got 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c equals 0. And I'm just going to solve this for c. I've got 16 minus 8c equals 0. I subtract the 16 from each side. So I find out that a negative 8c equals a negative 16. I divide each side by a negative 8. And I find out that c equals 0. That's the one value for c that will give me 1 real solution. Okay? If I do the same thing with the next one, again, I have the b value is 4. I have the a value, which is 2. I'm just going to solve this for c. That's 16 minus 8c is greater than 0. I subtract the 16 from each side, just like I did before. I've got negative 8c is greater than a negative 16. I divide each side by the negative 8. So I find out that c is, well, since I divided by a negative, I have to flip the inequality sign, so it's less than a positive 2. So when my c value is less than 2, if it's a 1 or a 0 or a negative 1, I'll get 2 real solutions. And then the last piece, I do the same thing. I plug the 4 in for b, I plug the 2 in for a, and I just solve this for c. I've got 16 minus an 8c is less than 0. I'm going to subtract the 16 again. So I get negative 8c is less than a negative 16. I divide each side by the negative 8. Once again, since I'm dividing by a negative, I have to flip the inequality sign. So I find out that c is greater than 2. So when my c values are greater than 2, I get no real solutions. And that makes sense. So c equaling 2 gives me a 0 discriminant, c is less than 2 gives me a positive discriminant, and c is greater than 2 gives me a negative discriminant, thus giving me 1, 2, and no real solutions respectively. Okay? If I look at the next one, it says a ball follows a path modeled by the equation y equals a negative 0.5 x squared plus 6.2 x plus 8.1. X is how far it's going horizontally, and y is the height. And we want to know how far horizontally will the ball travel from the starting point before it hits the ground. Okay, so we're talking about the ball hitting the ground. We're talking about a height, which is y, of 0. So I plug a 0 in for y. And now I just have to solve this for x. And there's a couple ways I can approach this. Most of you are probably going to go right to your quadratic formula, which is fine. And we can do it that way, opposite of b. That's a negative 6.2 plus or minus the square root of b, which is the 6.2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is a negative 0.5, times c, which is an 8.1, all over 2 times a, which again is the negative 0.5. Okay? And now I just have to use my calculator and start plugging this in. I'm going to start with what's under the square root, the 6.2 squared minus 4 times the negative 0.5 times the 0.8, or the 8.1 rather. So I find out that I've got negative 6.2 plus or minus the square root of 54.64 all over 2 times a negative 5, which is a negative 1. And now I just have to plug this in. The square root of the 54.64 is going to give me a 7.39. And I'm just going to round that to 2 decimal places, plus or minus the 7.39 all over a negative 1. And I just have 2 things to do. I have to do the negative 6.2 plus the 7.39 divided by a negative 1. And that's going to give me a negative 1.19. And then I do have to do the negative 6.2 minus the 7.39 and divide it by a negative 1. And that gives me a 13.59. And when you look at these 2 answers, only one of them makes sense. Okay, when you think about it, if we're talking about how far from the starting point, we're not going to measure the distance in a negative. So since this is a real world example, I'm going to toss the negative answer and say it's got to be 13.59 feet. That's it. Okay. And number 19, it says that we've got a box. All right, so let me draw a box real quickly. Pretty good looking box, Mr. Jansen. I know we're all very impressed with my artistic abilities. And it gives me some dimensions here. It says that the length is 3 times longer than the width. So I'm going to call the width x, which means the length of the box is going to be 3x. And then it says the box is 4 inches high. So this is 4 inches. And it tells me that the volume is 300 cubic inches. Well, volume is just length times width times height. So it's just the x times the 3x times the 4 That should equal 300. And now I just have to solve this for x. That gives me a 3x squared times 4, which is just a 12x squared. And now I have to solve this for x. I go ahead and I divide each side by the 12. Let me write that up here. Let me show my work. So that gives me x squared equals a 25. And now, of course, I take the square root of each side. So I find out that x equals, technically when I take the square root, it's plus or minus 5. But since we're talking about a measurement, it's just going to be 5. So my width is 5 inches. My length then would be 15 inches, and that's what it asked me for. It asked me for the length and the width of the box, and that's it.